Ready to start. So good evening, everyone. My name is Allegra Klein, and I'm a member of Reform Elections Now, also known as REN. Welcome to tonight's presentation titled ERIC, Electronic Information Registration Center. Partisanship can destroy the most useful ideas. Our speaker is Peter Cyrus, Director of Research for REN. Before we start, though, I wanted to let you know that REN is embarking on a new groundbreaking project, and we need your help. Many groups around the country are advocating for new voting systems, such as ranked choice voting, top two nonpartisan primaries, and approval voting, as well as third parties as a way of curing our political polarization. The problem is that few really understand the impact of these systems on elections. Supporters use examples like toppings on pizza, but the difference between mushrooms and onions is hardly as consequential as the difference between Trump and Biden, or whether a third party will act as a spoiler. To demonstrate how these voting systems work, we're going to focus on the 2024 presidential election. We're going to ask everyone to nominate candidates and subsequently cast votes. We will then tabulate the votes using a variety of voting systems and present to you how different systems can produce different results, even with the same votes. We hope you and your friends will join us in this groundbreaking work. More information will be provided over the summer. And if you have not already signed up for our mailing list, we encourage you to do so by going to our website, www.reformelectionsnow.org, and clicking on Join Now. Without further ado, I give you Peter Cyrus.
Thanks. I normally, before I start, don't give any pitches for anybody in our audience, but because my wife had to go in the hospital and we had to come back for doctor's appointments. In my other office, where I usually give the presentations, I have hung the most remarkable photograph I have ever seen, and which was taken by Steve Summerstein, one of our attendees today. So I urge you to come back to the next presentation where you will see Steve's remarkable photograph from the Selma to Montgomery March. That's a paid political announcement for Steve. No, kidding. It's not paid and it's not political. So today we're going to talk about the electronic registration information system. And this may seem like a really small topic, a really unimportant topic. And in some ways, it is small and unimportant. And that's what makes it interesting, because it shows the depths of partisanship that are destroying our country. Now I'm going to see if I can actually work the slides. Okay. So how do states keep track of voters? When someone moves from Connecticut to Florida, how does Connecticut find out the voter has moved? It doesn't, unless the voter goes and tells them. When somebody from Pennsylvania buys a beach house in Delaware, how do the two states know in which state the person is registered to vote? They don't. If a voter in Wisconsin gets an Arizona driver's license, how does Wisconsin learn that the person no longer has a Wisconsin license? It doesn't. And when someone lives in Iowa but attends university in Massachusetts, in which state is the student eligible to vote? Probably both. Now, when someone votes in two states, like, how does each state find out about the double voting? It doesn't. You can vote in two states all you want and nobody's going to care. Now, when someone dies, how does the state learn it's lost a voter? it doesn't have a clue. Social Security Administration knows, it stopped sending checks. But the registrar of voters doesn't know unless, the bereaved calls up and says, I got to go to the funeral of my husband. By the way, he died. Take him off the voter list. Yeah, that happens a lot. Now, keeping track of voters should be easy, but it's not. Look, with the IRS, the Social Security Administration, the USPS, the Department of Motor Vehicles in each state, it should be very, very easy to keep track of all voters. But it isn't, because in this federal government that we have, states don't share information. Now, maintaining voter registration rolls is a challenge because everyday voters move. Family members, as I said, don't report the deaths of a loved one. So in 2012, Pew Research found 1 in 8 voter registrations were no longer valid or significantly inaccurate. 2 million dead people were still listed. 2.7 million people had registrations in more than one state. 51 million were not registered to vote, and 12 million had records that were inaccurate addresses or things like that, meaning the mailings didn't reach them. You say, well, who cares? Because a lot of states have rules that if you don't respond to mailings from the Department of Elections, you're finished. You no longer are registered. So this is not to say, we're not saying that millions of people are voting illegally, but inaccurate voter databases make elections much more difficult and questionable. Now, as I said, having 1 in 8 registrations inaccurate, 2 million dead people still registered, and 2.7 million people registered in multiple states presents a serious problem. Republicans, Democrats, and independents all want a system where everyone has a vote and no one has more than one vote. And for Republicans claiming millions of dead people voted illegally, and for Democrats claiming voters were hassled because they went to the wrong polling place, having a secure national database seems like a no-brainer. What could be easier and more nonpartisan than ensuring the voter rolls were accurate and no one was beating the system? Okay, so in 2012, with funding from Pew Research and the leadership of somebody named David Becker, blue states, Delaware, Maryland, Colorado, Washington, purple states, Nevada, and Virginia, red state, Utah, founded ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, basically to create a database to assemble information from the federal government and the member states to deliver information to the relevant states so they could maintain their voter rolls, and to help states reach out to potentially eligible but unregistered individuals. Now, in a time when people question election results, such an organization seemed both necessary and nonpartisan. Now, how does ERIC work? ERIC obtains information from state motor vehicle departments, state voter registrations, the Social Security Administration, and the post office, and it provides this information to the relevant states so states can update their voter rolls. So if somebody dies, they tell the state that person is registered in, hey, this person died. Somebody goes to the USPS, changes their address. Hey, even within a state, they tell that state this person changed their address. As I said, it also tracks citizens who are eligible to vote but not yet registered. The states may then reach out to these people, but the states are under no obligation to do anything with this information. It's a service. Okay, now how is ERIC organized? On the right of the slide, you can see the leadership of ERIC. It's election officials from Michigan, Ohio, Georgia, Minnesota, Washington, Pennsylvania, and Utah. This is a pretty good mix of red, blue, and purple states. So it's led by state election officials. While most of these leaders are elected or political appointees, ERIC itself is nonpartisan. David Becker, who started Eric, became a non-voting board member and then left the organization. And Eric has only 3 employees and no office. Everybody works remotely. So, and its budget, this is all $1 million budget, an average of $30,000 a state. If you think about spending $1 million to correct the voting rolls, that's the cheapest thing I've heard of. And everybody seemed to like Eric. As I say, despite three-person staff, everybody applauded the ability of Eric to improve voting rolls and limit illegal voting. You see, first, the Secretary of State of Ohio said that Eric lets us improve elections and decrease fraud and cut polling place times and have more ballots counted. This is a service that can help improve elections in Eric. And the subsequent Secretary of State in Ohio in 2023, remember that time, 2023, said, Eric is one of the best tools we have for maintaining the accuracy of our voting rolls. Here's $1 million, February 23, they love it. One second, I'm just somehow. In July 2018, Iowa joined Eric, and in a letter to Iowa voters, the Secretary of State wrote about election integrity, voter participation. He mentions that Pew Research has given them a grant to identify Iowans who were eligible to vote, and that participation with Eric will allow Iowa to collaborate with other states to identify voters who moved outside the state, recently deceased voters, and duplicate registrations. And in March 2023, again, remember that date, Pate called Eric a godsend. So the Secretary of State of Iowa thinks this is a godsend. Now, we have, there's a typo here. I think his name is DeSanctimonious, or DeSantis, one of those two. But Florida and DeSantis liked Eric. Ron DeSantis issued a big press release saying that he was thrilled to join Eric and that it was going to lead to cleaner and more accurate voting rolls. And one of my administration's top priorities is protecting the integrity of Florida elections, which is why Eric joining Eric is the right thing to do. And you can see that both his Secretary of State and Supervisor of Elections, and listen what the Supervisor of Elections in Florida, appointed by DeSantis, said. Supervisors of elections have long advocated for Florida to join Eric. It is an incredible tool to help ensure our voter rolls are accurate. On behalf of all supervisors, I thank Governor DeSantis for his tremendous leadership on this issue. Man, everybody loves this thing. So with this nonpartisan goal of fixing the registration system and the public support from leading politicians, Eric just started to grow like crazy. Blue states like Connecticut, Illinois, you can see the whole list there. Purple states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico. And red states, Alabama, Florida, Iowa, Louisiana, all Oklahoma, all joined Eric. And by 2022, Eric had 11 blue states, 9 purple states, and 13 red states. I mean, can you get more bipartisan than that? Well, more than half the states and a majority of blue, purple, and red had joined an organization with a simple bipartisan goal of cleaning up registration data. And the more states that joined, the more effective Eric could be in accomplishing its mission, because once, for example, Florida joins, everybody from other states who moves to Florida, then the other states get the information. But then the attacks started. Attacks. Eric, this organization with 3 people, no offices, and $1 million budget started to become attacked by the conservative right, the Federalist Society, Judicial Watch, Verified Vote, Gateway Pundit, and others. Even Donald Trump, who never has a bad word to say about anybody, attacked Eric, claiming on True Social that it pumped the rolls for Democrats. And look, and the right really let into Eric. I mean, look at, I won't read them all, but look at some of these quotes. Election integrity said, the best data money can't buy. You know, it's Gateway Pundit wrote how the left fooled states into boosting Democratic turnout and how to stop it. Who's cleaning our voter rolls? Soros-funded Eric is now used in 31 states. And the conservative organizations attacked Eric. They had a variety of the usual left-wing suspects. Among others, they focused on Eric, David Becker, the founder of Eric, CEIR, an organization founded in 2016 by Becker, Mark Zuckerberg, the Pew Trust, George Soros, the Brennan Center, and other people and organizations associated with the Democratic Party. Now, Eric, remember, Eric is run by all these state officials. So they got to keep their mouth shut because, you know, they're secretaries of state or assistant secretaries of state working with all the other states. So as these attacks started, Eric just shut up completely, except it posted a notice on its website, a letter on its website that basically said there's a lot of misinformation. You could read what we wrote here. And, you know, it basically said we don't connect to any state registration systems. The members have complete control. We just give them information, and all this attack on us is meaningless. But the reality is that an organization controlled by political appointees with only 3 employees and no office is hardly competition for the attacks it was receiving. So what happened after the attacks? Well, the red states started to flee. Louisiana and Alabama resigned in 2002. Florida, West Virginia, and Missouri resigned on the same day in March 2023. Ohio became the 6th to resign in March 2023. Remember the quotes from the secretaries of state of Ohio, how much they loved it? Yeah. 1 month after endorsing Eric on NPR, Secretary of State LaRose stated, Eric has chosen to ignore demands, to embrace reforms, and he's got a whole list of complaints about Eric. And Iowa was the 7th state to leave 2 weeks after its Secretary of State had called it a godsend. Then Virginia resigned on May 11th, and on May 23rd, the legislature in Texas passed a law paving the way for Texas to leave Eric as state number 9. And one day I'm going to learn how to change slides. Okay. So an organization that had built a strong partisan base was suddenly losing its Republican members. By the end of June, the number of Republican states belonging to Eric had dropped from 13 to 5, while a purple state, Virginia, with a Republican governor, also left. Now, it's, as I said before, it's simple. The more states you lose, the less effective your data is, because if somebody now moves from New York to Florida, their data is lost. If somebody moves from Virginia to, you know, Connecticut, their data is lost. So losing states weakens Eric. Losing Republican states makes Eric more partisan. If you look at the 2022 numbers, blue 11, purple 9, red 13, that's nonpartisan. In 2023 numbers, you know, 11, 8, 5, that's not nonpartisan. So why did the conservatives suddenly turn against Eric? Well, their first argument was that Eric was backed from the left. The initial funding had come from the Pew Trust. Remember, Soros was in there somewhere, which the Federalist Society and others claimed was left-leaning. Pew was funded by left-wing billionaire George Soros. Well, it's not, none of Soros's money actually went to Eric. And Eric's founder, David Becker, was attacked as a, quote, a hardcore leftist who couldn't stand conservatives. Now, there's only one problem with these arguments, which is old news. Everybody knew this. Every state knew that Eric was started with funding from Pew Trust. Everyone knew David Becker founded Eric. Everyone knew David Becker had taken a non-voting role at Eric and then resigned. None of these issues deterred these states from joining Eric. So why suddenly had conditions that had existed for a decade become important? We'll get back to that subject. The second target was a potential conflict of interest with a new organization founded by David Becker after the 2016 election, and it was called the Center for Election Innovation and Research, CEIR. And its mission was basically to work with election officials to build confidence in elections that voters trust. And its two major goals were to restore trust in the election system and promotes procedures that encourage greater voter participation while ensuring election integrity and security. This sounds also bipartisan. So why did it become a target? Well, there are two answers here. The first simple answer is that Eric and CEIR had a divergence in goal. Eric was primarily focused, despite what it said, it was primarily focused on cleaning up voter rolls. CEIR was more focused on registering new voters. Both are fine goals. And while Eric, because it was controlled by these state officials, took no stand on the 2020 election, CEIR came out saying the election was the most secure and transparent in US history, and it gave its Defenders of Democracy Award to Al Schmidt, the former city commissioner of Philadelphia, and Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia. And as I said earlier, while Eric has an annual budget of $1 million, CEIR became a much larger organization. It, as an example, received $50 million from Mark Zuckerberg and his family, a donation the Federalists described as Zuckbucks. I looked at my wallet. I don't have any Zuckbucks, but if anybody has any extra, please send them to me. So it's not unreasonable to claim that CEIR is somewhat more transparent than Eric, and that there was a potential conflict. As we said, Eric is primarily a tool to fix voting lists, although both the Secretary of State of Iowa and DeSantis applauded it for helping registering more voters. Eric, as I said, is a small organization. CEIR is a bigger organization. And many opponents of Eric claim that there's a conflict between the two organizations, suggesting CEIR used voter information from Eric to pursue its own goals. However, the conservative opponents of Eric continually raised questions about whether CEIR was taking advantage of the relationship between the two organizations to use CEIR, to use Eric's data for their ends. Now, understand this. We have no, reform elections now has no issue with the goals of CEIR. We believe it should be easy to register and vote. We support early voting and mail-in voting. We believe in election integrity should be enhanced. The question, which is a reasonable question, is whether the right wing jumped on this relationship and on David Becker to impair Eric. We can't judge whether that's the case. But the right wing could be wrong in their attacks. David Becker could have made a mistake in the way CEIR and Eric intertwined, or the US could be just too partisan to accommodate any nonpartisan organization, no matter how simple its goal. And, sorry, we're trying to figure out how to. These are things they didn't teach us at Harvard, which is how to change slides. Now, it could be just politics. One of the potential explanations for the departures of red states, voiced by media like NPR and the New York Times, it's just politics today. NPR suggested that many secretaries of state were running for re-election or even higher positions like senator and governor. Many voters on the right, spurred on by these right-wing organizations, started to give voice to the arguments against Eric. To give themselves an advantage in the primaries, many of the state election officials who had praised Eric quickly turned against it. And in several instances, this position helped them get elected or re-elected. Pure politics is always a good explanation for why people stake out new positions. And it is possible that candidates in red states seized on this issue as a way to pander to their bases. However, if politics is the answer, the future of nonpartisan organizations looks extremely dim. Okay, so what's going to happen now? No matter what your politics here, it is clear that the victims in this dispute are Eric and the US voting system. Right-wing opponents like the Federalist Society and Judicial Watch will clearly survive. CEIR is well-founded, but Eric could be toast. As states leave, the information tracked by Eric becomes much less valuable. As we've said over and over again, databases are useful only if they're complete. And as most of the Republican states leave, it's more difficult for Eric to portray itself as nonpartisan. Now, the Republican states are saying they're going to set up their own organization. Well, that's great. So you have two competing organizations, neither of which has sufficient information to work. Sorry, we're going the wrong ways. I will, hold on. Now, can Eric be saved? I don't know. One solution would be for the remaining members of Eric to make adjustments that would attract states to rejoin the organization. People like Brad Raffensperger, who's Georgia's Secretary of State, are currently attempting this, but Raffensperger is hardly the most popular person with the base of the Republican Party. Eric did nothing but focus on the goal of maintaining, if Eric did nothing but focus on the goals of maintaining voter lists, many states might be convinced to rejoin. Now, can we do something else? If Eric cannot succeed as a nonpartisan organization, are there other things? Well, all the secretaries of state could get together and develop their own organization with the limited goal of keeping voter rolls up to date. There's a problem here, which is that that's what Eric was supposed to be in the beginning. And so whether these people can play nice together, who knows? Congress could create a national organization to share information between states. This seems logical, but given the partisanship in the country, it could also be a challenge. Now, just here's one simple idea, which is supposing all Americans got a voter ID card and supposing there were a national database. I mean, all Americans have Social Security cards. Why not a voter ID card? A voter ID card would be a federally issued identification, just like a passport or social security card. And if a citizen moves, that citizen could apply for a change of address on the national database, much the same as a citizen would for Social Security. The federal government would automatically transmit the information to relevant states. So if a citizen moved from Scarsdale, New York to Palm Beach, Florida, both states would be informed so they could adjust their records. Citizens would still have to comply with local requirements. This has nothing to do with registration, in a local district or anything else. But the voter ID card would provide a national database which every state could utilize. Now, we need to recognize that there's a problem. 1 in 8 voter registrations are inaccurate. Millions of dead people are still registered. Millions of people are registered in multiple states. Tens of millions of people have incorrect addresses. It doesn't matter whether there's substantial cheating. There probably isn't a huge amount. But as long as people from both parties don't trust the system of registration, people will question elections. The information should be easy. Social Security Administration knows when people die. The Postal Service knows where people live. Motor vehicle departments know where, where people are registered to drive. The government knows the identity of all citizens. This is not complicated stuff. There is no reason why this information cannot be provided to every state so that they can maintain their voter rolls. This is a simple problem. Why can't we find a simple solution? So, as we said, we need a solution to the issue of voter rolls. ERIC was a great concept. It could have worked. It could still work. But once these parties get involved, everything gets politicized. We indicated secretaries of state could set up their own system. The federal government could set up their own system. There could be a national ID. Problems are clear. Solutions are simple. And the question that we have to ask is, if the problems are clear and the solutions are simple, why can't we work together to solve them? Now, as we said, ERIC was a simple idea with a critical problem, working to help states purge voters who had died, moved, or were registered in other states. Yet at this point, it's become another victim of the partisan divide. Organizations like ERIC can be challenged because a small group on one extreme or the other starts yelling fire in a crowded theater, and the majority in the middle who benefit from a safe and secure election system remain mute. We need to know who's registered to vote. We can't have a voting rolls, I spelled wrong, filled with dead people or people who are registered in multiple states. We need to speak out against those who are trying to co-opt simple solutions for their own partisan goals. We can't let partisan institutions fall victim to nonpartisan institutions fall victim to partisan extremes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Peter. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, either using the Zoom method or the manual method, and we will call on you. And Peter, you can stop sharing your screen now. Thank you.
Okay, stop sharing. Stop sharing. Okay. Well, did I stop?
So it looks like we have
Peter, it's usually at the top. Great, you did it.
great.
Okay.
It looks
Mike,
like
over to you. Yeah.
Mike has his hand up. Yeah, Peter, as one of the problems that that was being identified mainly from the right was that that the registration or the information of the data that was collected by ERIC was being used for partisan purposes by another organization. Is it really simple to protect the data without having something akin to what the IRS or the Social Security does to protect their data? which is probably a much larger investment than the $1 billion that Eric had.
Well, the issues from the right, I'm just going to move my computer so the sun is not shining on me. The issues that the right is complaining about, as I said in the presentation, have to do with this other organization, CEIR, that was founded by the same person who founded ERIC. You know, in government, there is a tendency to try to lump a huge amount of things together. You see this in bills and in everything else. There is a simple need to get voter rolls. The answer is it should be very easy to have something that just accomplishes what Eric was supposed to accomplish. But when both sides like to overreach, that's when you run into trouble.
We do have a comment from the chat saying, how about expanding the informing to the general public? Perhaps Peter can start by writing a letter to the editor of the New York Times.
And the answer to that is that we have at Reform Elections now a new publicity committee, which they wouldn't let me be on, but we have really some top people on our publicity committee, and we're working on how to get information out. And anybody who would like to join us in this effort, you know, we would love to have more people on our publicity committee to communicate.
Thank you. Other comments?
Peter, it's Herb Kaplan. Is it possible that there's something sinister going on, that certain people might not want to have clean voter rolls, so elections could be murky and could lead to the states deciding who won an election in their state?
Oh, I mean, look, it is clear people don't want clean voter rolls. I mean, I don't know how many of you remember not the last, well, it happened both times, the Herschel Walker, the two Senate runoffs in Georgia. And Donald Trump, in both cases, urged Republicans in Florida who had any real estate in Georgia to go into Georgia and vote. Don't worry about what state you're voting in. And you know, one of the big fights, like it was mentioned in the presentation, CEIR worked with the state of Michigan to register 120,000 new voters. And it's clear from the results in Michigan that more of those were Democrats than Republicans, and that the Republicans do not want those, you know, 57 or whatever the number million people who are not registered to vote. They don't want those people to vote because they think that, hey, maybe they're all Democrats.
Thank you. We do have another question in the chat. If the Federalist Society is at the initial core of the opposition, can they be privately contacted to work out a solution?
And anybody can be contacted, but you know what happens is this, and there've been a couple of examples. Look at the guy from Iowa who in March called Eric a godsend and 2 weeks later advocated leaving Eric. Neither are all political. This is the system. These are political animals. There are a couple of examples I could give you where Republican secretaries of state were being challenged in the primary by somebody to their right. And they realized, and the person to their right started quoting the Federalist Society and some of these other people. And the Republican secretaries of state said, the heck with this. It's not, we can't sit with this albatross of fair elections around our neck. We got to pander to our bases. And that what's wrong with our society now is that partisanship. The reason this is an interesting example to me is partisanship always wins. And you can go to the Federalist Society. I'm sure they have a good explanation. We went to David Becker, who's on the other side. He had a good explanation. But in the end, you have people with good explanations that destroy nonpartisan organizations with simple goals.
Thank you. There's another comment. So you're saying if the relationship between Eric and CEIR, if between those, then Eric could survive.
Well, there is no longer any what's interesting is there's no longer a relationship between Eric and CEIR because David Becker left Eric. He still runs CEIR. So the question is, if Becker he became non-voting and then he left, and he's focusing on CEIR. So why did all the Republican, if the Republican states should have gotten what they wanted when he left? So why now, after the problems were, any potential conflict was resolved by separating the organizations, why now does it become a political football? And the answer is because that's the way the game works.
Thank you, Peter. Another question. Is there any word from the League of Women Voters?
No, not that I've seen. I mean, the League of Women Voters may have said something that I missed in my research, but but it's interesting, as I say, if you read, say, the New York Times article or listen to the interview on NPR, you'll say, well, this is crazy. This is all politics. And I'm not prepared to say that one side is crazy or the other side is crazy. What gets me is that we can't work together.
Thank you. Mike, you have a question.
Yeah, I'm still hung up on the goals that was originally with Eric, particularly the one of increasing registration, which is one of the ones that where there is a difference between how the left and right perceive the advantages of increasing registration. And it seems like the real goal that should be important here is trying to clean up the registration rolls. So why wouldn't it be more important or better, smarter for Eric to restate its goal to be only to maintain and protect a database that would be used for the administration and cleanup of voter rolls?
Makes tremendous sense to me. Interestingly, the guy who was most positive on advocating that Eric was going to register new voters is Ron DeSantis, and it did, and most of them were Republican. So it's not clear to me that, if you look at the Republicans gained a gigantic amount in Florida thanks to Eric's efforts, in part thanks to Eric's efforts. But, your question, Mike, is very good and very simple, which is, why can't a simple organization with a simple goal keep itself out of politics?
Seems like instead of writing a letter to the New York Times, we need to write a letter to the administrators of ERIC and ask them if they can simplify their goals.
And the answer now is, in my view, a lot of the damage has been done. How do you get these states that have resigned to say we're coming back? You know, it's how did it get here? And the answer is, it's like, you know, a brush fire. Everything was going great. More states were joining. And then all of a sudden, publicity starts on one side or the other, and boom, it's over. And to me, the real issue is, you know, how do the moderates who are still there, who want the election system to work, how do they stop from getting consumed by a conflagration like this?
Hey, Peter, it's Maury Hogan. Thanks for this. You know, you say that it's all politics, and it really shouldn't be. Well, but that's the world that we're in, as you've said. That's where we are. So you know, are there specific gives that each side could give in order to get back to a bargaining table here? I mean, yeah. As we know, the Democrats do not want a national voter ID card. 100%. They are in no way interested in doing that. So why? Give? Well, because they think that a great percentage of their voters, you know, won't take the time to get the card, and they'll be denied, you know, access to the polls. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, they've talked about this for a decade or more. But is that a give that they could give?
Sure. I mean, you know, but it's like saying Democrats don't want their people to get voter ID cards. You know, how about Social Security cards? They're perfectly willing to accept Social Security cards. The point is with politics that all these things come and they have baggage with them. And the question is, how can we do something that doesn't have baggage with it?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think it's, okay. I think it's, you know, we know that there's going to be baggage. How much of either side's baggage can we live with? I mean, you know, it's the sausage making process of getting any kind of a bill passed. I mean, there are things that people like, and there are things that people hate. And you know, and what you want to do is you want to get to a position where everybody hates it a little bit.
Yeah.
So nobody's incredibly happy, but there's a give and take.
And how do you get each side to give something and take something?
Well, you make a proposal.
Yeah.
You say, you know, what would it take for you guys to want to re-embrace ERIC?
Yeah.
And then what would it take for you guys to re-embrace ERIC? I mean, is there one thing? Are there two things that you want? Maybe it's the decoupling with this other organization. Totally. Maybe that's something, or maybe it's the national ID card, which is, as I said, anathema.
But I would say, Maury, that if you decoupled CEIR from ERIC, which is now decoupled, and you got leadership, and you got the ones who are remaining in ERIC to sit down with all these people who've left and said, okay, 3 months before everybody left, why didn't all these people get together? Why, you know, why didn't these people get together 3 months before all the crap hit the fan and say, okay, how do we work this out? How do we save this organization? And is the answer that they were just too busy with other things, or is the answer they'd rather play politics than save an organization?
Well, which in theory benefits everybody, right?
I would think it would benefit everybody. So the question is, why didn't they do it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear why they didn't do it is because, you know, one person thought that there was an unfair advantage to one side versus the other, and they didn't like that. I mean, politics is all about horse trading,
Yes.
and you know, and so what can you give? I mean, as my union buddies used to say, I mean, give and take is really interesting. You give and I take. You know, it's just a, you know, it's a function of what do you need to get back on track? Let's throw the old stuff away here. What do you need to get back on track?
And one of the ways that we might consider is the fact that if we look at the Republican individuals who said they want to set up their own organization, if we start looking at that as a way to do that as a cooperative enterprise, why not work with them and try to work from there and say, okay, that's a viable seed to restart Eric with a limited objective. One objective, two more objectives should be included. One of them is certainly to take out the idea that we're just trying to increase registration, because that's not really that's one that's too easily politicized. And the other one is that we find a way to protect the data so that people don't abuse its use.
Who are the critical people, Peter, that you would want to talk to? Is it the chairman of each political party?
No,
Is it a representative, you know, cross section of the secretaries of state of various states? I mean, what's your who are the key people that can?
I would say it's the remaining leaders of Eric plus the secretaries of state who, you know, like in states like Ohio and Iowa and those states who liked it and then left. You know, a guy who says it's a godsend and 2 weeks later leaves the organization. You know, tell me what went wrong. What can we do to get you back in here?
I see that Leslie Coolidge has her hand raised. Leslie?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I have a wonky camera, so I'm not going to turn it on. So while you've been talking, and I'm a good example of this because I am undoubtedly registered in 2 states, although I have been very careful to only vote in one. And the one I'm now voting in is Florida, and there's actually been a lot of coverage. I'm not there at the moment, but there was about voter fraud cases and stuff. And, you know, DeSantis has set up this election fraud police kind of thing and stuff. So I've been Googling while you've been talking, trying to figure out how they figured this stuff out. Because I was sort of familiar. I mean, some of it is the people who were felons and then were allowed to vote and they went after them. And that's not really the issue. But then they found several people in the Villages, which is ostensibly a quite Republican place, who it turned out had voted in two separate states. And I was trying to figure out how they figured that out, because you would think Eric might have helped with that. And at least, according to what I'm reading, it was a whistleblower who sat there and compared voting records in 2 states and came up with something like 260 people that he thought had voted in 2 states, told Florida, by the way, doesn't really care because their vote counts and they did it first. And they don't really care all that much that these people also voted in other states. So it's just kind of an interesting example.
No, it's interesting, Leslie, because if you, and I can, happy to send you the research. Florida, the the Secretary of State, the head of the Board of Elections, and DeSantis bragged about how many people they were able to catch because of Eric. I mean, they had actual data on, we found, I forget the exact number, 2,000, voters who Eric identified as voting in multiple states.
Well, that's 1/100th of 1% of the vote that's cast.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is, so were, 42 people identified, 42 old people in the, what other state are you registered in?
Illinois.
Illinois, okay.
That's good. I've only voted in the one since I registered in Florida.
What do you decide on which election looks better to you?
I am a Florida resident, but I guess my point is, I don't think anybody would ever have told Illinois that I'm registered in Florida. So, and I didn't tell them. I'm just not voting there anymore.
Well, but Illinois was not, Illinois was never part of Eric. And Florida is no longer part of Eric. So there's no danger of of anybody catching you. So don't worry about it. Voting, as Mayor Daley used to say, vote early, vote often.
Right.
Yeah, but I think the point is there really isn't that much fraud. The problem is that without having clean rolls, the opportunity to muddy the waters is very high.
Yeah.
Well, and DeSantis has made a big issue of it from a political perspective. So anyway.
And of course,
it's political low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to throw a very big rock in a pond and watch the ripples. And that's what these guys do. It may not be a big issue, but if it's an exciting one, they're happy to go all in.
I see a question from Bill Hartz, and then I want to get back to something more he said.
So really quickly, I think just along the lines of what Mike just said, this doesn't seem to be a really large problem. Especially from the Democratic side, many people are saying, the actual instances of voter fraud are very small. So I think the tendency is going to be for people to say, well, why are we getting so bent out of shape about Eric? It's not solving a real problem.
And I think the answer, that's a good point. And I think there's a pretty simple answer, which is, first, whether or not there's a lot of fraud, there are a lot of people complaining that there's a lot of fraud. Okay. And so you have, after the election, you have 40% of the Republican Party who still think that the 2020 election was fraudulent. You have to have a system that people trust is going to work. And the reason I decided to talk about Eric today is that it's such a simple problem. And if this isn't working, then how many other things aren't working? And, it's what we need. We can't be looking 3 years after an election and having 40% of one party say the election was fraudulent because millions of people voted illegally. The idea of saying, okay, we've plugged the holes, people are not voting illegally, this is simple. That's of great value to the election system. I want to get back to something that Maury brought up, which is, it's something that Allegra started with. And one of the things that we have believed is that the first past the post election system, the system we have now, where right-wing Republicans win primaries, left-wing Democrats win primaries, there's very little competition, and that in the end, you have elections, most elections don't matter much, and the people we're electing are on one side or the other, and there are very few moderates. That's something that we have long believed. And Allegra mentioned this new program, we think groundbreaking program, because we can't find anybody else who's done it, which is if we took everybody's votes, but plowed them through different election systems, whether it's ranked choice voting or top 2 nonpartisan primaries or something like that. And we believe, based on testing that we've done, that the results would end up significantly different. That if everybody had the same vote, but we counted them in different ways, we had different election systems, we believe we would have a significantly different government that would have much more moderation and would work much better. And so what we are asking, we're going to be asking all of you to do is we're going to be sending out a notice. Who would you like to see run for the Republican presidency in 24, Democratic presidency, third party? And then we're going to ask you in a subsequent thing, we're going to take the people who win the nomination and we're going to give you a chance to vote in the primary and the final election. It's going to be very simple, but then we're going to tabulate it using all the different election systems that people have advocated. And we're going to present to you how the different election systems could result in significantly different governments.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for joining. I think we're going to wrap up now. We're just a little bit over our time. And it was an excellent presentation and nice dialogue afterwards. We very much appreciate joining us and hope that if you're not already on the list, you will subscribe at reformelectionsnow.org. We look forward to seeing you in the fall. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.